Thank you, Bruno, and good morning again, everyone. It's good to be with you all. Just want to start by, in a few moments, sharing a few photos with you guys, and pardon me, inviting you all to just dream a little bit with me based upon these photos. I went to a meeting yesterday. Let's have the first one up. And at the end, if you left this place where I was meeting yesterday and you're going back home at night, this would be the view that you would have. Are we sharing that with our Zoom folks as well?
We are now.
Beautiful.
And the mic is still on, so if you're okay.
Can anyone tell me where this might be? Can everyone see that photo?
Down under.
Close.
Taken from the first south.
No, where would I have been taking that photograph? Up in the hills, Gooseberry Hill to be specific. Next photo. Another iconic place that we all might know of. You can probably just use the arrow key and go to the left. Arrow on the keyboard to the left. Yeah. Anyone know where this photo was taken? Does anyone here like Cottesloe? Yeah. I love this place. Next photo, another iconic location. Not Scarborough, no. It's a bit further east, Bondi Beach. That is the southern part, I think, or northern part? Yeah. It's amazing because they've got that pool that's kind of carved out right by the ocean, and it's just an amazing place to be. I got to go there a couple of years back, and just a wonderful place to be. But this is another amazing location that's based here in Australia. If we go a bit further away, we'll look at the next photo. Where is this location? Anyone know this one? Sorry? Mr. Boone is very well traveled here, isn't he? He knows all these places. Buckingham Palace. And how many young girls do you know of that actually dreamt of living in a palace or a castle or that kind of stuff? One of those places or locations that we all think about as being amazing locations. Next photo. Hollywood. One of the most incredible addresses you can have or locations you can live in on the planet, by some people's regard, is Hollywood. And next one is just one of the houses in the Hollywood area, one of many that are just extravagant, elaborate, amazing homes. Thank you, Peter. We can stop sharing the screen. And so just using those as a guide, what I'd like to do is have you all think about, if time and money were no object or not an issue, where might you guys choose to live? If you could take all your family and friends with you and build anywhere, where might that be? Where would you choose to pick as a location? Anyone? This is not a test. This is a getting to know you exercise. Perth. Okay, great. That's good, and that's achievable. Wonderful. But if money was no object, and if there was not an issue with time, I'm getting too old, I can't move now. If that was all gone, where on earth would you choose to live?
Emu Point.
Emu Point. Very cool. Been there. That's a lovely little spot. Absolutely. Anyone else? Does anyone think anywhere outside of WA or outside of Australia?
I'd like to live in the Isle of Capri.
The Isle of Capri. Okay. Wonderful. Sound amazing. Anybody else? Hawaii, that's a good one. That's a lovely spot. I haven't been there yet, but Tahiti? Absolutely. Wonderful locations and wonderful spots that we can choose as places that we might want to choose as a location. Now, in real estate, they have a mantra that says location, location, location. It's all about the location. And you could live in the best house on the block, but if it was right across the street from maybe a pub, or if it was actually on a busy intersection, you might struggle to sell that home when it's time to move out because of the location in which that house is built. And the location affects us in many other ways. I mean, we try to pick the best possible place, but some of the studies from University of Minnesota in the US mention or share how location affects us and how our personal environment affects us. It impacts our well-being, just our physical state of mind, where we live, and our location, our work, and our office, and our home. It influences our mood. So if you have a brightly lit building or brightly lit home, then you're probably going to be a bit less depressed and more happy and more excited just about life in general. It impacts our behavior. I mean, if you go to a messy place and you're like in a dormitory at uni or something and it's messy, you might be tempted to just throw your stuff on the floor wherever you happen to be because everything else is just kind of all over the place. And it facilitates or discourages our interactions with other people. So if you have a nice home where you've got nice, lovely, comfortable seats, and a guest comes, they're going to be wanting to sit down and spend some time and have a cup of coffee. But if your seats are all like hard and stiff and uncomfortable, they might come in, say a couple of words, and then they'll be pretty much gone before you know it. So the location and the environment determines lots of things in our life. So it even actually reduces our stress and affects our emotions, our physical health, and our longevity. So based upon where you live and your location, it can actually affect the length of your life. That's pretty amazing stuff to consider. Over the centuries, location has been so important. It's even been the cause of wars in many times. When you think about Jerusalem, for example, how many wars have been fought over Jerusalem? Dozens. And it still continues to this day. And for the Jewish people, the temple stood as the very heart of that city. So when you talk about real estate and location, it's important to remember that nowadays when you think about, for instance, the temple, almost every single Jewish community has their own little synagogue or temple in this day and age. But back in Christ's time, there was only one temple, and that one temple was in Jerusalem. It was such an important and special place. It was a place where only the priests were allowed to go inside to the interior of it. And actually, even the full-blooded Jews who were born and bred there were only allowed to go to a certain point. They couldn't go to the very middle and to the heart of the temple. And then even further back, you had a space on the outside where the Gentiles could go and do their thing. But it was such a special avenue or venue that even those who were born in that land were not allowed to go into the interior of it. The actual religious rituals of the temple were solely in the hands of the priests. For example, if your wife or daughter gave birth to a baby, like Peter Boone here, and you wanted to go and celebrate and worship and give thanks and sacrifice, or if you had a child that got better from an illness and you wanted to go and sacrifice and celebrate and worship God, or if you had a pilgrimage and you went to go give offerings to God, you would actually bring your animal, whether it was a dove or a goat or a ram or whatever, to the temple, and the priest would take it from you, go away for a while and do all that he had to do, and then come back to you later with either some roast beef or some roast lamb. But the priest had to be the one to go and actually do the offering, not just the average Joe Blow or the average person. That's how special that location was. But even though the actual act of performing the rituals was left to the priests, this location itself, the temple, played a huge role in all of the land. And everyone realized that this is the one place on earth that is sacred. It's the one place on earth where God meets with humanity. That's how important that location was in that time. And it's interesting to know that this is a place that even Jesus went to worship and to celebrate and to teach. Except for one time when he didn't go there for that reason. In John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22, which is our reading for the day, John chapter 2, 13 through 22, it says, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, just about this time of the year, and that's why I like the RCL, because we get to actually walk through Christ's steps on earth throughout the year. And this is would have been about this time of the year back in his days. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at the tables exchanging money, kind of like you find at the casino or at the money changers facilities. So he made a whip out of cords. And I actually growing up in Nigeria, when we were in school, we had some corporal punishment. So if you were a bad boy or bad girl at school, the teacher would make a whip out of cords. It was actually typically out of goat's hide, and they would twist it around a little stick so it got nice and curly and get it nice and dried, and then the whip could actually stand by itself, and they would use that to beat people. But he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their table. So this is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who comes to the temple and seems to be making a bit of a ruckus at the temple. He seems to be slightly agitated, slightly perturbed, and slightly losing it in the temple. To those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market. His disciples remembered that it is written, zeal for your house will consume me. The Jews then responded to him, what sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this? Jesus answered and said, destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. Verse 20. They replied, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days? But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus had spoken. So in retrospect, in hindsight, it was a lot more clear to the disciples what he was talking about. So observations from this text. Question is, why did Jesus cleanse the temple of people selling cattle and sheep and doves and the money changers? What was he doing that for, and why did he do that? And the quick answer is just basically just to stop the corrupt practices that were going on in the temple. People had brought animals to the temple and to sacrifice, and those who were there would use it as a marketplace to kind of exchange, make a profit, and take advantage of those who were going up to worship their God. The money changers made things more difficult as far as worshiping God one-to-one, because they imposed rules and requirements and certain rituals that ended up taking advantage of the people and getting in the way of that worship between them and God. And in verse 19, he says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again. They assumed he was talking about the physical temple, but he was actually referring to his body, as we find out in verse 21, his physical human body. So 2 points to carry out from this little verse is, number one, you could view this as a prophecy of Christ's resurrection like the disciples did. They knew later on that this was a prophecy of he's going to be resurrected. But the second point is that when he spoke about the temple being his body, he spoke in the present tense. He didn't say, at some point my Father will raise me up again and my body will become the temple. He said, my body is the temple. And when you consider John 1 verse 14, the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That's actually from the Greek, it actually has two meanings. One being to fix one's tabernacle, or to build one's tent, or to make one's abode, or to dwell with. The word became flesh and he made his tabernacle, or dwelt within us. So this is the Son of God, Emmanuel, God with us. And Christ is showing a new intersection at this point where God meets with humanity. No longer does it have to be in the physical building, that temple. It's now his physical human body. It's an intersection where there's no dependency on location. You can be anywhere, and Jesus, God, our triune God, is with us and in us. We also become temples and places of intersection between God and humanity as God's people. And as our Pastor Emeritus has been telling us for many, many years, our triune God comes not just to dwell with us and hang out with us, but to dwell in us. And by so doing, he, God, makes our bodies his temple. 1 Corinthians 6:19, we all know this one. It says, do you not know that your bodies are the temples, plural, of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. And that's pretty amazing stuff when you stop and think about that. That our bodies, our human bodies that are all, sometimes broken and falling apart, are God's temple. If you think about it, we have the God here who created the entire world and the universe. He could have chosen any location, any Hollywood, Cottesloe Beach. He could have chosen any location on earth, any location in the universe or in the cosmos to build his temple, but he chose to do it in you and in me. And that is kind of mind-blowing when you stop and think about that. So, God has selected as his preferred location for his temple our human bodies. And so many people don't know that or don't realize that yet, but we do. So as we begin to conclude for today, it's wonderful to gather together in community and worship God in community, and there's no replacement for that. So whenever we can, it's great to come together and meet at church and fellowship and sing together and worship and learn about God together. But when the temple gets destroyed, as it happened in 586 BC and again in 70 AD, or when you have a big pandemic in 2020 that strikes the whole world, and many of us begin to wonder, what the heck do we do now? How do we meet together? How do we worship God because we can't go to the building, we can't be there? What do we do when things change? Where and when do we worship God? How do we worship God? And when the going gets tough and when circumstances prevent us from worshiping together as we might want to or might be used to, what do we do then? Christ himself provided some insight to these questions, and we'll break into a conversation between Jesus and the woman at the well. This is found in John chapter 4, verses 20 to 24. And she's talking to him. She says to Christ, she says, "Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Going down to verse 21. "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." Then down to verse 23 and 24, it says, "Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth," which can be done anywhere. Here in church together, at home, at a friend's place, in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the spirit and in truth. So you might be wondering, why did Jesus Christ clear out the temple? Why did Jesus make a whip out of cords and drive the people selling all the doves and the sheep and the cattle out from the temple? Why did he scatter the coins of the money changers and make a commotion in the temple? Why did he overturn their tables? And why did he say, "Get these out of here and stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace"? He did this as an example for you and I today. Basically, he was saying, clear out anything that keeps us from worshiping in the temple, from worshiping God as we ought to. Clear out anything that interferes with the way that we worship God or gets in between us and our worship with our God. So what gets in the way of our worship within our body as God's new temple? Is it maybe our practices or our behaviors? Is it some of our habits that we have? Or is it maybe traditions or rituals? Or is it maybe the culture? Or is it something that's beyond us, like the government putting certain mandates on certain people? I know we have some Christians that meet in Malaysia, and I met with a Malaysian pastor a few weeks ago. And in Malaysia, they are banned from meeting together for church like we can do. And so these Christians dress up in Muslim attire, like they go into the mosque, but they go to each people's homes and they have church dressed as Muslims in people's homes. That's what they have to do in certain parts of the world, where we have the freedom to meet here as we would like to. So what gets in the way of our worship within our body as God's temple? It's important that we value ourselves and others as temples of God. And we're no longer tied to worshiping God at a set location, or at a set time of year or a set day or a set season, as if God can be confined to dates and times and locations. The God that we serve is way beyond that. We're never separate from God. Rather, we are valued by God, so much so that he has chosen to make our bodies, you and I, and all of humanity, his temple. When you think about the beauty and care that went into building the original temple, the construction of it, in 1 Kings chapter 6, it was such a special building, such a special location. And this is actually kind of symbolic of the current temple. People are valuable to God. You're valuable to God. I'm valuable to God. All of humanity is valuable to God. Even the worst person you can think of holds value to our God. Everyone is made in God's image. Everyone is God's temple. And everyone has God's Spirit in them. They may not know it, but they do. Location is everything in real estate. Location is everything also in our spiritual life. So no matter where we find ourselves, just keep in mind that God is there. When we worship together like we are today, God is here with us. God's here with us on Zoom and here with us in person in the building. When we worship at home alone or with our family or with other families, God is there with us. It's all about location, location, location. And we, family, are God's temple. Have a blessed day and look forward to seeing some of you at the picnic afterwards.